Finance, Audit, Legislative Affairs meeting of January 4th. First off, we would like to get permission to have Kate on the voice. Sharon's the first, Betty's the second. All those in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, a motion for the approval of November 30th, 2021 minutes. Eden? Second? Rob, thank you. Any discussion, comments, changes to the, or additions? Seeing none, please vote. Aye is for and nay is against. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Monthly financial report. Julie, welcome to the new year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.
We are over our heads with the ERP system, so my mind has been fully there. But as I prepared today, going over my notes, not much has changed since last month. We just went to a new month. One thing I did want to point out, I did check where we are today as of December. We still have a half a payroll to post and some more revenues to come in. So it's still going to be too early to really predict where we're going to be at the end of the year. I know in this report we're pretty favorable for general fund, but as of today, it's over $1 million less than where this report is. So I just kind of want to give the board a realistic expectation that things still could fluctuate. But revenues are doing better than we budgeted, because for 2021 we budgeted in the middle of 2020, and so there's a lot of unknowns there. So revenues are doing better, primarily in intergovernmental. So your sales tax, your the local use tax is doing better than we projected, and PPRT was double what we expected, and that we couldn't have told you that when we did the budget. So the one fund, there's one fund that will be positive at the end of the year, and that's the circuit clerk. Other than that, we've done a really good job this year of taking some of the funds that were negative now to positive. So overall, I would say the financial picture is pretty good for where we're at in October. And I don't have anything else that's really changed beyond what I did for September. So I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Any comments, questions for Julie? Just sidebar, if no other questions, how is the ERP system transition going?
It's really hard for me to hear you. I'm
How's
sorry.
the new ERP system working and going? Expectations?
It is going good. We are full steam of being fully on board as of January 1st, 2023. So there's a lot to do. We'll get there. We'll get it done. I personally have been working on doing the new chart of accounts because there was a few things that needed to be changed. And from your end, there might be a few minor things that you might notice, but a lot of it is that big iceberg underneath. So it's been quite a bit of work. And the most challenging part about it is honestly that Monday through Friday, 3 of the 5 meeting days are usually filled with meetings. So then you have homework and your other job and all the other fun stuff. So, but Heather is starting on Monday, so I'm really looking forward to having her on board and having another hand in the office. So
sounds good. Thank you.
It'll be good once it's done.
Okay.
So Shauna's going to do the Hennington-related items, Mr. Chairman.
Shauna, the Hennington Oaks financial report.
Good afternoon, everybody. Paul is out of the office today, so I'm going to kind of just combine our 2 reports. If you have any questions, I'll try to address them both. The accounts receivable report is in your packet. That is as of the end of October, as they finish finalizing up the November amounts for the packet that will go out the end of this month. for committees. We've been talking to you about some of the larger cases that of accounts receivable that we have been working on. I had a follow-up call with RSM this morning regarding our bad debt project. They are working on filing our reopening of that cost report, and then that will help us get those reimbursements for the, I believe, 66% of the Medicare outstanding. So we hope to have that wrapped up here real soon. And then we'll be working on our 2021 cost report that is due at the end of May of this year. One of the other large cases that we have been working with the state's attorney's office to get closed out, I can speak with you offline on that in a little more detail. But there is actually another court hearing on January 21st, I believe. And so we hope to have hopefully some resolution to that shortly thereafter, which that will be another significant dollar amount of that AR that hopefully we can get cleaned up. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any or speak to you offline.
Any questions, comments for Shauna? Okay, then I guess you'll stay right there and go through the update on the accounts payable plan. Do you have any comments on that?
I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. Kind of rolled that into my financial plan update as well, but
Okay, but no major changes?
No, hopefully, and this is for October, but we'll be able to give you a verbal update on hopefully that court case next month. It won't be reflected in the numbers because we won't be on that month yet, but hopefully we'll have some good news at committee later this month.
Okay, thank you. Scott, legislative update?
General Assembly is partially back in session this week. They've had to cancel some sessions due to COVID, and as we discussed previously at the committee, and after speaking with the legislative delegation, we're not doing a joint breakfast this year. That's a function of the compressed legislative schedule. For those just to remind everyone, the General Assembly is scheduled to adjourn in mid-April for the spring session. So that would include any legislation plus the state's budget. And so as a result, we're mostly going to be playing defense as opposed to pushing major legislative initiatives. A couple of items that we are already aware of, and I actually have a call scheduled for Thursday with our lead lobbyist. There is some legislation related to the Treasurer's Office and some legislation related to the Coroner's Office that I'll be talking to Taylor about. And then also just having a broader discussion with him to get his thoughts and opinions on what's likely to move this session and what's not, and where we should be focusing our efforts.
Okay, thank you. We have a joint resolution with the Election Commission budget amendment. Could I have a motion, please? Eden, Blair, and Sharon Williams. Okay, discussion. Tom's passing out a brochure on this, so.
While Mr. Bright is passing that out, Mr. Chairman, I'll quickly run through the financials,
Okay.
which is why it's actually a joint resolution, and then and then Tom, I'm sure, will be happy to talk, as he did yesterday at Ways and Means, about the actual system itself and the process and any of the voting related questions. So the budget amendment, and this is an FY22 budget amendment, is $1,244,838. It's the recommended source is other equipment or capital equipment in the capital fund. That's broken out for two items. One is the new voting system itself, which Tom will talk about, and then the upgrade to the e-poll books, which Tom will also discuss. Just quickly, as there was some discussion at Ways and Means about it yesterday, for those of you that are not on Ways and Means, in terms of why we did not specifically budget for this in the FY22 budget, a couple of reasons. We had a range during the budget process to what this might be, but we didn't have an exact dollar amount. And in fact, the Election Commission didn't settle on a final dollar amount until after you had adopted the FY22 spending plan. But if you'll recall from discussions and presentations to this committee throughout or at multiple points last year, we knew that this expense was coming and that we'd been planning for it. And the number before you today is roughly in the ballpark. It's in the ballpark of what we were anticipating. But we did not budget for it because we didn't know exactly what the number was going to be. And as I said, the Election Commission had not finalized a vendor and a price by the time you had adopted the budget. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any money-related questions, or we can turn it over to Tom, and he can kind of talk about the voting side of the item.
Let's go ahead and talk about the money first, since that's where we're at. Any questions for Scott? Okay. Mr. Bright, you want to give a little summary?
Sure. So we'd, in evaluation of the current system we've had, which we purchased and first used in March of 2006, the system we have is at end of life. We can't get parts for it. If we can get parts, they're used parts. The software is at the end of useful life. We've actually got some components that we couldn't get an update to it if we wanted to. So as we approach the end of life, we went out for an RFP in August. Information, the RFP was sent to all 4 vendors that have certified systems in the state of Illinois. We received 2 responses back, one from Hardin or Civic, who's our current vendor, and one from ES&S, which is actually the largest voting systems vendor in the United States. One of the other vendors responded to us that they weren't going to respond because they couldn't meet the requirements needed for the City of Peoria City Council at large fractional cumulative voting. They won't be able to do that. They're actually that vendor is actually a reseller of an actual manufacturer's system, so they couldn't make those kind of changes. We had an evaluation committee made up of 2 members of the county board, Steve Rinker and Sharon Williams, 2 members of the election commission. It was a bipartisan board. We had representatives from both parties, from both those groups. There was election commission staff, and then we had a member of the county IT department to part of that evaluation committee, just from an expertise, especially since a lot of this component is software. That evaluation committee met. We did an initial evaluation on the written response to the RFP. Then we had both the respondents come in and do presentations. After those presentations, the evaluation committee got back together. We did a final evaluation. We had a scoring matrix. There was 12 categories that were scored, and the recommendation to the Peoria Board of Election Commission was for Hardin or Civic's Verity voting system. They scored the best 9 out of the 12 categories on the scoring matrix, and they actually tied on the 10th one. It was a unanimous decision. I think overwhelmingly we felt this was the better system. During the course of that evaluation, we also determined that to work with the new system, we needed to upgrade our existing electronic poll books to allow for ballot on demand in the election day process. If you're familiar with the system now, you go in and you check in with the existing electronic poll books, and once that's done, you're given an access code to go over and vote on the existing system. This will allow us to pretty much stay with that same concept, except for this is a paper-based system. So when you check in with the electronic poll books, at that point, the poll books have been upgraded to actually print your paper ballot, because, like I said, it is a new paper voting system. I did give out a brochure. If you look at page 4 and 5, I don't have any of the pieces of equipment with me, but I wanted to give you a visual. On page 5, the Verity Touch Writer and the Verity Scan. So the vast majority of voters will vote on a paper ballot using a pen, and then they'll take it over and put it into the Verity Scanner, which actually has a sealed ballot box underneath, and it'll drop into that box. The Verity Touch Writer is an accessible ballot marking device for requirements with ADA. They'll vote on that. It is a ballot marking device. And then it'll print a ballot. That ballot will also go into that Verity scan. And then we'll be using electronic poll books to print ballots on demand in Election Day, but in early voting, we'll be using the voting system's actual Verity print to do that. It's just a better fit in that early voting system because of just the number of ballot styles that are in through the county. To give you an idea of the setup in a typical polling place, on page 4, there's kind of a diagram. The voters are checking an electronic poll book, that Verity print or electronic poll book, depending on early voting or Election Day. The ballot is then given to the voter. They vote in a voting booth. They go over and they put it in this Verity scan, and then they're done voting. There's several things we like about this system. One of them is it's obviously an upgrade. There's been dramatic changes in elections and the perception of elections in the last 15 years. I know it seems backwards. We had some of this discussion yesterday, and we had some of this discussion in our evaluation committee to be going to paper from electronic. But the vast majority of elections in the United States are on paper. They're using a paper ballot. There's security concerns that are driving some of that. Not as much in Illinois, although we were always an outlier, one of only 2 jurisdictions in the state that have all DRE to begin with. We really couldn't replace the system we had with an all electronic voting system. There actually isn't one that exists, at least that's certified in the state of Illinois. Everything was going to be a ballot marking device or a paper ballot, and then that was going to go in the same scanner. One of the things we did like about this is the ballot that the voter votes on will be the exact same looking ballot. It doesn't matter if they vote Election Day, they vote early voting, or they vote by mail. It's going to look like the same ballot. So that was the process we went through. We've negotiated a price, and we're finishing up the contract for the new voting system and the upgrade to electronic poll books. So if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them.
Any questions for Mr. Bride? A lot of you were in it before. Yes, Brandy.
Does the written process slow the process down during the voting time?
No, some of the work that's done is it always is going to depend on the voter themselves, but it's relatively natural to fill out a paper ballot. I mean, you're filling in a box, so from that standpoint, that should speed it up, and it also allows us to expand and contract because we're not limited by the actual number of voting equipment we have in a location. I don't think it'll slow down the process. The scanner actually scans at the end of the night. That device will come back. It looks like a USB card that comes out of it, and we tabulate from that. That process really hasn't changed. It's just that there's a physical ballot that it's scanning and counting. The nice thing about that is it makes it much easier to go back afterwards and audit, because instead of having a roll of paper, you actually have the physical ballots that you can sort and retabulate. We are required under Illinois law to do an audit of 5% of the precincts on Election Day and 5% of the equipment in early voting. It's pretty ponderous the way we have this system. That will actually speed that process up.
Tom, when you go in a voting booth, will you be voting or signing with a pen, or what will actually put the?
No, you will be given either a blue or black pen to fill out the paper ballot. And we'll
So
supply
it's
those.
like we did years ago, back when I was a kid. Okay. All right. Any other questions? That's why I commented yesterday. I thought we were going backwards, but. Mr. Chairman, yes.
Tom, how much public education is involved in this move, some might argue, backwards to paper again?
So we definitely have a plan going forward. We've actually talked to Gretchen with the county to do a lot of outreach and public education on the new system. When we first get it, we're planning on doing that. Now, the nice part about it is there doesn't have to be a lot of public education to fill in a box with a pen. There will be a lot of education on why we're stepping back and using the scanner, but I think I mean, we know that that education's got to be out there, and we're going to do a lot of it. I anticipate not only outreach and voter education, but in the past we've done some videos on changes when we've done election law to give the voters access to YouTube videos so they can watch those kind of things. We plan on doing a lot of outreach, as we did when we replaced the system 15 years ago, but also as we've done when we first started early voting, when we started a lot of vote by mail and those kind of things. So the outreach is definitely in the plan, and the voter education component.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things I note for certain is that people that I'm concerned may be confused by the new process don't have access to YouTube and wouldn't know what a YouTube is. That's the population I'm concerned about. And regardless of the reason we have to make the change, I support that. I support the funds here, but this is a very modern approach to technology, fronting it with paper and scanning it. I don't disagree with that at all, and I certainly understand this vendor's been around a while too. I am concerned about the public's weariness towards new systems, both from how to use it point of view, and secondly, is it as fair and reliable as the old system? So that's just my comments.
The other comment, as years ago, we used to have to put an X in the box, corner to corner, and then it was all changed to shading the whole box in. So what are we doing this time on it?
So the way the system will look at it, it's looking for inside the box, and it's looking for a percentage of that box that's filled in. That percentage is low enough so that we can get an X, but also there's a threshold. And we have experience with vote by mail, having paper ballots. You will see somebody puts a large check, and that may go into another box. The system's designed to tag that and allow an adjudication for that to say, look, they meant this when it went up into this. So any kind of mark in there will trigger it, but it's looking for a certain percentage of that box filled. So it doesn't have to be, the ideal is to fill that box all the way in, and that's what the instruction will be. But if they don't get it all the way filled in, if they just do an X, it will more than likely count the ballot. And there is a warning on the scanner if you overvote or if you undervote, so that the voter understands that. That's the biggest change. Is the current system, you can't overvote, you can't undervote, but you can't overvote. The system will kick it out if you overvote a ballot, so that the voters aware of it, and the election judge training that we'll go through will deal with that process. That'll be the biggest change in the polling place for the election judges and for the voter, that manual overvote.
Thank you, Mr. Bride. Any other questions for Mr. Bride? Yes, Brian.
Well, this is certainly going to create and instigate a lot of skeptical people out there. I mean, it's unfortunate that the technology is going backwards instead of forward, and I just feel like this is a huge step backwards as far as what is perceived as with election integrity. And like I said, it's unfortunate that the technology has gone this way instead of, maintaining what we had.
Mr. Bride, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would. We're in a little bit of a unique situation in Peoria County because I think we've had the system we've had, which isn't a common system. In Illinois, there's only 2 jurisdictions that have the system we have. Almost everybody else has a system where they're voting on paper, and they may have an ADA ballot marking device. The paper ballot is very much where the industry has been going the last 10 years, and it's driven by security. It's also driven by auditability, that you have a paper ballot that you can go back to and physically count. And it's interesting to me because in the vast majority of the country, if we were talking about going to electronic to paper, they would be in favor of that from the election administrative standard, because that's really where the industry is at now, and that's what's considered the gold standard, is to have that paper ballot. That hand-marked paper ballot is what's driving the industry and what's driving most of the election administration forward. So it seems like going back and for us, but this is where the majority of the country is going. Even those jurisdictions that had electronic voting are going towards paper. In some states, they're being forced to. We couldn't do electronic, well, we couldn't do what we have now in Illinois because there isn't a system that's been certified. There's only a handful of states where you could even do an electronic version, which we had before, other than in a ballot marking device.
I think your comment yesterday was some of the questionable things about voting was in electronic transfers versus a hand copy, and even though it's going to be scanning processes electronic, but that's what you said yesterday.
Yeah, the ballots are going to be scanned and tabulated that way, but like I said, under Illinois law, we're required to do an audit of 5%, and we'll do those with a hand count on the paper ballot. But if we get into a close race, I anticipate that we will be looking directly at the ballots and hand counting those ballots to verify that the electronic tabulation was accurate. That's much harder to do with the system we have now.
Yes, Ms. Blair.
So to make sure I understand this, two questions. The first is I would be taking my ballot and putting it into this machine to scan it, and then it gets locked, right?
Yes.
It's not just flying around somewhere. It's in a locked box.
It goes into the scanner and drops into a locked and sealed ballot box, yes.
Okay. And second, can you define overvoting and undervoting for me?
Sure. An overvote is if it's a vote for one, they vote for two people. Or if it's a vote for yes, no, they vote for both. That's an overvote. An undervote, and I want to make sure that I'm going to use my definition and not what the state thinks, because the state's wrong. I'm going to go with the federal definition. An undervote is, the simplest way is that you don't vote for anybody in a race. But it also could be it's a vote for three and you only vote for two. That's also an undervote. So it's voting for less than the maximum choice, and overvote's voting for more than the maximum choice.
And so if I were to overvote, would I just have a null ballot? Would it not count?
So the way when you put it in, it'll kick it back out that you have an overvote, and it'll say you have an overvote on this race. If you decide you're fine with that and you put it in, it won't count that race. It will not affect the rest of the ballot. It just nullifies that specific race.
And if I undervote, like 2 out of 3, I only picked 2 when I could have picked 3, what happens?
It'll warn you that you're an undervote for specific races in Illinois. We're required to do that, but it won't affect the ballot. And actually, in some cases, I mean, that's a choice. I don't know that overvote's a choice, but undervote is obviously a choice.
But it won't kick it out.
It won't. It will warn you. I mean, we can train it to kick it out, but we do have to. We typically don't in an undervote, and it will warn you that there's an undervote.
Good. Mr. Ricker.
Mr. Bride, maybe one more clarification on the overvote. So if I'm a voter, I put it in, I overvote, and it tells me I have an overvote, and I want to correct that. Would you explain to the
Sure.
committee the steps taken to correct it and manage the ballots?
Sure. So we will have a judge stationed next to the scan, not watching the voter do it, although we intend to have basically, this is going to sound really simple, but you basically take a file folder and give it to them. They vote it, they cover it up when they come in, they can slide it in so it can't be seen. When that kicks back out and the voter wants to revote the ballot, the election judge will take that voter back to and the nice thing is we have is the ballot on demand. And then that ballot will be voided and that voter will be issued a second ballot. But we'll have a record. We will keep the first voided ballot. We keep those secure, not tied to the voter, but that we have the number of voided ballots, but also specifically because we're doing a ballot on demand, we'll have not only a record of this person was issued one, but we'll have an electronic record of the voter was issued a second ballot. They can vote that ballot and then use that one into the scanner.
Would they have to go back into the line to get back into one of the booths?
No, I think we'll walk them right to the beginning, unless they're mean about it. And that's probably the biggest adjustment we're going to have is that, because like I said, now you can't overvote. You can undervote. You can always undervote. You can actually vote a blank ballot. You can do whatever you want, but you can't physically overvote on the equipment we have. Now, you can in a vote by mail, and there's nothing we can do about it. If there's an overvote, it just doesn't count. We don't issue a new one on vote by mail, but that's just a training issue, and it's an instruction issue when they're given the ballot to make sure that they read, look, if it's a vote for one, you can only vote for one. If it's a vote for up to 3 or whatever it is.
Any other questions? Yeah, Sharon.
Tom, can you talk a little bit about the city? You know, we have the uniqueness of the city council and the how those are percentile voted. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the city of Peoria city council race is a unique fractional cumulative voting is what it's called. And when I say it's unique, it's the only fractional cumulative voting in the United States. There is cumulative voting, and it's done a little differently in each jurisdiction, but in the city council race, the next one, which is in 2025, you have up to 5 votes. If you vote for one person, they get all 5 votes. If you vote for 2, it's 2.5. If you vote for 3, it's 1 3/4 or 1 2/3. That's the one that is a little bit of a pain. And then if you vote for 4, it's 1 1/4 and 5. Each voter gets 1. So one of the requirements of the RFP is to be able to do that calculation, and the HART system already does that because we're a customer. The other vendor said they couldn't do it at the moment, which I sort of understand because it's unique to us. And in most cumulative voting situations, I think any vendor will tell you that they would program specifically for your cumulative voting, because even though cumulative voting sounds the same, it isn't. Everybody does it somewhat differently. But that was one of the requirements of the RFP, is to meet those specific requirements related to the city election. And that is driven, I don't know that everybody knows it, there was a lawsuit in the late 80s for representation to the city council, and actually it's the Peoria City Council, the Peoria School District, and the Peoria Park District. They were divided into districts, but the cumulative voting was the solution for the at-large in the city of Peoria. So that's a federal court order that requires that.
Okay, any other questions? So then before I ask for the vote on this, Mr. Sorrell, would you tell how we're going to transfer from one account on this, please?
Sure. So the action item will appropriate the dollars from the fund balance of the capital fund into the capital budget for FY22. The reserves of the capital fund have multiple sources. One of which is the original establishing transfer from the general fund. The overwhelming majority of it is public facility sales tax. This is not a public facility, so that as a source is not available to us. So what we're going to be doing here is we'll appropriate it now out of reserves, and then once we see where FY21 finally finishes up, we'll account for the use of those original general fund dollars for the majority of the voting system component, and then we'll likely come back to you with a budget amendment to move general fund dollars into the capital fund to cover whatever that remaining amount is.
Thank you. Everybody understand that? Okay. Please vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay.
Aye.
No nays? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Last thing, we have another resolution, and it's a budget appropriation transfer from the county staff reassignment from the county auditor's office.
Mr. Chairman, before you get that, I'd ask that you also maybe do the motion for the contract extension with Cook Consultants Limited.
I did miss that. I'm sorry. Thank you much. We will go that then as our next one, the contract extension with Cook Consultants Limited. Could I have a motion, please? Betty and Sharon, thank you. Discussion?
Julie's going to summarize the item for the committee, Mr. Chairman.
Hello once again. Matt Cook is our financial expert that comes in primarily during the spring, winter, spring to help us with our annual audit. He has a lot of governmental clients that he is an expert more so than we are in-house for GASB. As you guys know, we also do our financial statements in-house. So as long as we're doing that, we will need somebody of his level. So the RFP was done last in 2016. So we are at the end of that contract due to COVID and primarily really the ERP system. The time to go through and do another RFP, it's just not on our side. So we're asking to do a 2-year extension. And then after those 2 years are up, we'll do another RFP and see if anyone else applies for that or if Matt Cook is still the best vendor of choice. So this is to extend it for 2 years. Any questions?
No questions? Of Jimmy.
Julie, or Scott, so this isn't like our external auditors where this contract has to rotate to a new vendor every so many years?
Correct, Mr. Dillon. This contract does not have a rotation because he's not actually conducting or performing the audit. He's assisting us in preparing the financial statements that will be audited.
Good question. Any other comments, questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried unanimously. Now we'll get down to the budget appropriation transfer from the county staff, resigned from county auditor's office. Have a motion, please. Rachel. Rob, thank you. Discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As noted in the agenda briefing and the resolution, when you convened on October 14th to adopt the FY22 budget, Mr. Dillon made a floor amendment that increased the county administration budget for FY22 in the amount of $87,000. The purpose of that was to ensure that there would be spending authority in the FY22 budget for 2 of the 3 represented team members that at the time were in the county auditor's office. We had already put in the recommended budget dollars for the 3rd position in another department. We told you at that time that we needed to work out the union notification or the notification to the team members pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement. We needed to find positions in the organization that could then be offered to those team members. I can report as of this meeting, and actually as of yesterday, the first business day of the fiscal year, that one of the 3 team members has accepted a position in the highway department. One has accepted a position at the coroner's office, and the 3rd team member chose to pursue employment elsewhere. The resolution before you does a couple of things. First, it moves that $87,000 out of county administration and moves it into the coroner's budget to cover the wages and employer share of health insurance for the position moving to the coroner's office. It also moves money into the JDC budget as part of the process we offered to courts. Was one of the places that we where the 3rd position was created. That would be the one that the 3rd team member chose not to accept and pursue employment elsewhere, but we said to the JDC that they could keep that position. So that's the first thing that the resolution does. The second thing that the resolution does is it appropriates $24,400 from the reserves of the general fund into the coroner's, into the coroner's budget, so that the team member in that position go from a 0.75 to a 1.0 FTE. All three of these positions were offered up as full-time positions versus three-quarter positions. Happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Mr. Sorrell? Anyone? Yes, Mr. Renault.
And all three positions maintained were union positions?
Yes, all three are actually in the same collective bargaining unit that represented the positions in the auditor's office. And that would be PICA AFSCME.
There was actually a net gain because they became all full-time positions?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Please vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. We have corrective action or committee action, a review of executive session minutes. Could I have a motion, please? Jennifer, a second. Betty again. Thank you. Jenny, you got the floor.
As you consider your executive session minutes, it remains the recommendation of the state's attorney's office that all previously held minutes continue to be held because the need for confidentiality still exists, and that you destroy your executive session recordings for those that are over 2 years old unless they pertain to pending litigation.
Anybody got questions for Jenny? I didn't think so. Okay, all those in favor, aye? Opposed? Motion carried. Motion carried. Miscellaneous? Happy New Year to everyone. Welcome back. Glad to see everybody. Hopefully everybody's recovering and from the holiday cheer, and hopefully you don't have the other things to recover from. Yes, Brian.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I talked to you in December, and I also talked to Scott in December and told you that I was going to be coming to this meeting. I'd like to talk about qualified immunity. You know, I think everyone agrees that there is some need for police reform, and the bill that was passed in Illinois, you know, definitely addressed some important issues, but the qualified immunity seems to keep coming up. I talked to Senator Kaler back 4 or 5 months ago, and he goes, "Well, Brian, don't you appreciate the fact that I kept it out of the bill?" And I said, "Of course I do. Thank you very much." But the bottom line is that I keep hearing that they continue to study it, and you know, and weigh the pros and cons and different you know, sides of both arguments, and so I feel it needs to be put to rest. You know, if that would come to pass, who would want to be a police officer in Illinois? If that would come to pass as a county board member, what would you say to your constituents, you know, about them being protected from and feeling safe in their communities? And so I really do feel that the county board needs to consider sending a letter to the entire state legislature and Governor Pritzker stating that we fully support retaining qualified immunity, and that they discontinue studying it because it's acting as a weight hanging over the head of our law enforcement people. And these people are leaving one by one to go to other occupations. And this is so important because someday we're just all going to wake up and we're going to say, what happened? So this is just a very simple thing that I feel like we can do as the county board. And will we make any difference? I'm not sure if we will or not. I mean, Peoria County is not exactly just a little pebble in the road. I mean, we are one of the 10 largest counties in the state. So I think that there might be some weight in what we have to say. And so I would ask, Mr. Chairman, that this committee consider having a special meeting before the main January board meeting to pass a resolution to send this letter of recommendation to all of our state legislatures and the governor, that we support retaining qualified immunity, and that we ask that any study of it be discontinued.
Okay. Any comments on that in general? I think we can bring it up at our next executive meeting. We'll bring that up for discussion.
I thought this was part of this committee was the legislative affairs, and that's the reason why
I see.
I was
Well,
told to come here, so.
You're correct, it is. Okay, so you want to make it as a, well, you're not a member of this committee, so. So can we have a motion? What's that? Oh, okay. It'd have to be on the agenda to be up for a vote. Okay. Mr. Dillon.
Mr. Fennell, as I've argued in the past before this, I think it would be maybe more beneficial that we have some outreach to our current legislators to talk to them before we start debating state politics around this floor. And we've had that conversation about other things, and I know where you're coming from on this, Brian. But we have also had, which we're canceling, the Legislative Affairs Committee, where we sit down with our legislators. I would at least like to have a conversation with them, know where this is at prior to passing some sort of resolution out of this board. Honestly, Brian, I'm not educated enough on it where it is in the state legislature, and I think we should have a conversation. And there's some other things that the sheriff's brought to light recently, too, that need to be a conversation. So I would just ask, before we pass any resolutions, Chairman, that we reach out to our local legislators to start a discussion.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer?
I would also recommend too that we take the approach of waiting until there is an actual proposal before we say we oppose something. It's hard to tell what any proposal is going to look like until there is a proposal. Right now, there's just rumors floating by different groups. So I think it sets a better precedence to wait until there is a proposal to say we oppose something.
I understand that. I think in the meantime, I think Jimmy's got a better plan, because if you wait till there's a proposal, then they don't get your input. I think you need the input before there's a proposal. And I think Brian has also got a point to the fact that this cloud that's hanging out over there does affect the morale of the police, of thinking, if I get an opportunity and they got this thing that they may pass, maybe I'll leave. So that's the dilemma we have. Mr. Ricker?
I guess my first thing would be, I support that we get educated on, as Jennifer said, the proposal's not there today, but there's been a lot of other proposals around it, a lot of discussion. I'm not sure who's the best to educate the board members as to where it sits today, and then we can make a conscious decision with knowledge as to how we want to respond. But we do need to take action fairly quick. If we sit here 3 months from now and then something passes and we said, well, we didn't have time, shame on us. So I think Brian's comment was we would have a special meeting maybe before the full board meeting next week to get educated and put it on an agenda and make a decision if we want to vote and take action. Is that a fair option? And if Jimmy has some other topics, we include those in from an education and a potential resolution?
Well, I just have a problem logistically getting education and getting the right people involved to be able to do that by next, our next meeting, 2 weeks. Mr. Dillon?
Mr. Fennell, and one of the other things that was brought to light by the sheriff, and I think the reason why we need to have the conversation with the legislators, is the Illinois Department of Corrections, with how many inmates that he said are still not being transferred out of the jail, and at the reimbursement rate of $35 a day versus the $110. So before I feel comfortable voting on anything, I think there's proper channels. You have the conversation with them, you talk to them, discuss it, address your concerns, just like our constituents address our concerns to us. I don't want to be wading into state politics with not knowing what we're voting on. So I do think, Mr. Fennell, we need some time on this. This isn't something that we can just knee-jerk and make a vote on.
Rachel?
I do want to make one comment to echo some of what's already been said. I remember, regardless of personal opinions and how everyone feels about when the first bills were looked at, those were passed extremely quickly. I mean, it was literally overnight at all hours of the day and night how quickly those went through. So regardless of whether we make an action or don't make an action, I just think back to reading those when those first came out and how quickly a decision was made. And I do think if we, regardless of whether we make a decision to, as a board, send a letter or make a recommendation or not, if we waited, I think it was literally hours, because I remember staying up and watching that vote.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rand?
Mr. Chairman, I heard Brian's pitch on this before this meeting got too deep. I share a different point of view than Mr. Dillon, although I agree with both of his points of view. We historically have been very cautious about passing resolutions about the business of Springfield. One, because they don't care, okay? And two, because of unintended consequences. Clearly, the bill that created qualified immunity, as we all are complaining about, was done quickly, without, as Ms. Relaford has said, a whole lot of the implications being measured. But I'm awfully cautious about honking off two of the most preeminent legislators in Springfield, Senator Kaler and Representative John Gordon Booth, who have a hand in the outcome of the final legislation. So forgive me for reminding the rest of us that there's a couple of pivotal legislators right here in our book of them in Central Illinois that we want to tread very carefully how we ask for some relief.
I agree with what you said. I just wonder if there should be some communications with our administrator, at least getting the, not written letters, but communication, our feeling that we are wanting to protect what we have of our police force so we don't lose it, and our jailers and everyone else. So
I think that's an excellent idea, and we can put a couple of people together to go join Mr. Sorrell. I don't know what the sheriff's point of view is on this. It's been a while since I've listened to him opine on it. But where it is the issue, larger than what it is at this point, because there's an awful lot of time that's passed since the first bite at the document came out. And I don't even remember myself how deep it cut, but I know that we have tremendous concerns with the rumors about what it says. And I think maybe our legislative delegation can help us understand what the likelihood looks like of actual legislation.
I know communications is much better one-on-one than it is demanding with a in-your-face dictate. So I would support that we set something up right away. Yes, sir.
I just want to reiterate, I'm not worried about Senator Kaler. He already told me that he took it out of the bill, and he said, Brian, if you hear anything different in the future, let me know. Or he said, if it comes up again, I'm against it, but I'm worried about the people from Chicago and, and doing something in the dark of night, because I even heard a rumor that during the veto session, there was a certain caucus that was trying to get it passed. And so all of a sudden it'll happen, and we're behind the eight ball. And so it's just very simple. I mean, I think it would be very supportive of Senator Kaler's efforts, and you could even put that in the resolution. That we appreciate our Senator Kaler's work and trying to think of the right words, of trying to stop it. Back in can't remember if it was last March or February or whenever it was, but it could happen so fast that all of a sudden you're and this is so important, and I agree with Mr. Dillon that we should let the state legislatures do their thing, but this is so impactful on our community. I mean, public safety is the most important reason why we're around this horseshoe right now, is to protect our people. That's our number one goal, number one challenge, our number one objective, our number one duty, I guess is the better way to put it, and it's trickling. The people are just leaving one by one. It's just and we're just sitting here. I brought this up 6 months ago, and everybody just sat there. And so, I mean, Mr. Dillon didn't sit there. He made the same comments, but it's like, it's happening. I mean, these guys and gals are worried about, whether they should remain in a position of law enforcement, because this may or may not be retained in Illinois.
Get some opinion back to the board of the direction of our legislators and let them know our opinion of what it should be. And also covering the items that Mr. Dillon was talking about also. Okay, anything else? Miscellaneous? No other? Okay, adjourn. We can get something going with the legislators, even though they aren't gonna have this.
Yeah, so